It's funny how things can change in the blink of an eye. How the world can tilt sideways without so much as a warning. My life was steady. Ordinary. Really. Until everything started to shift. And I found myself at the center of a moral dilemma that I couldn't have predicted. Now, I'm left wondering if I'm the bad guy in my own story. I think about it a lot. Probably more than is healthy. But when you live in the situation I'm in, it's hard not to question everything. Especially when someone else's happiness is on the line. Let me take you back to the beginning. To when all of this started. I moved to the city about 2 years ago. Excited for a new chapter in my life. It wasn't anything glamorous. But I had landed a job at a local marketing firm that paid well enough to cover rent and a bit of fun on the weekends. I didn't know many people when I first arrived. But after browsing Craigslist for a while, I found a reasonably priced apartment that seemed like it would suit my needs. It was a modest 2-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of downtown. Nothing fancy. But it was enough for me. That's when I met my roommate, Rachel. She was about my age, give or take a year, and seemed like the kind of person who kept to herself. We weren't best friends by any means, but we got along just fine. She was kind, respectful, and we shared cleaning duties around the apartment. The arrangement was easy. Predictable. Exactly what I needed at that point in my life. We lived together without much issue for about a year and a half. And then, out of nowhere, Rachel announced she was pregnant. I'll admit, I was shocked. She'd never mentioned a boyfriend. And I hadn't noticed her bringing anyone home. But it wasn't really any of my business. And I didn't pry. She told me the father wasn't in the picture and that she planned to raise the baby on her own. I nodded along and offered my congratulations. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was going to change things. Maybe not immediately. But eventually. As the weeks went on, the changes started to creep in. They were subtle at first. Little things. Like Rachel leaving baby books on the kitchen table or rearranging her bedroom to make space for a crib. But then, around the 6-month mark, I noticed her behavior began to shift. She started nesting. A term I'd only heard in passing before but now fully understood. She was constantly cleaning, organizing, and preparing for the baby's arrival. I, on the other hand, started feeling more and more like a stranger in my own home. It wasn't that Rachel was doing anything wrong. She was just getting ready for a life-changing event. And I understood that. But the apartment was small. And with each passing day, it became more crowded with baby supplies. Diapers. Clothes. Toys. Bottles. The living room was filled with boxes of things she'd ordered online. And the once shared space felt like it was slowly being overtaken by her new life. That's when Rachel first brought up the idea of me moving out. She didn't ask outright. Not at first. Instead, she started hinting that maybe I'd prefer to live somewhere else. Somewhere less hectic. She mentioned how things would get busier once the baby arrived. How the crying might keep me up at night. How she didn't want to be an inconvenience. I nodded and smiled. But deep down, I knew what she was getting at. She wanted the apartment to herself. At first, I tried to brush it off. I liked living there. And it was convenient for my job. I didn't have the energy or the desire to search for a new place. Not to mention the fact that finding an affordable apartment in the city was no small feat. I figured we'd just work it out when the time came. After all, people live with babies all the time. Right? But as Rachel's pregnancy progressed, the hints became less subtle. She started outright suggesting that I look for a new place. Even going so far as to leave rental listings on the fridge for me to see. It felt passive-aggressive. And I couldn't help but feel a little resentful. I hadn't done anything wrong. We had a lease. Signed by both of us. And I was paying my share of the rent. Why should I have to move out just because she was having a baby? Still, I felt guilty. I knew she was going through something huge. And I didn't want to make things harder for her. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore the fact that this was my home too. I had a right to stay if I wanted to. Didn't I? The tipping point came when Rachel sat me down one evening and explained that she'd need the extra bedroom for the baby. She said it matter-of-factly. As if it were already a done deal. As if I'd already agreed to move out. But I hadn't. I told her as much. And that's when the tension between us really started to grow. She didn't understand why I was being so stubborn. And to be honest, I wasn't sure I fully understood it either. But the more she pushed, the more I dug my heels in. It wasn't just about the apartment anymore. It was about the principle. I had as much right to stay as she did. It wasn't fair for her to assume that I would just pack up and leave because her life was changing. My life was here too. Things became strained after that conversation. We barely spoke. And when we did, it was tense and awkward. I felt like a guest in my own home, tiptoeing around her and trying to avoid confrontation. But the resentment was building. And I could tell she felt it too. One night, I came home from work to find that she had moved some of my things out of the spare room. She hadn't even asked. She just did it. I was furious. I confronted her. And she brushed it off, saying that she needed to start setting up the nursery and that I should have seen this coming. It was the first real argument we'd ever had. And it wasn't pretty. I accused her of being inconsiderate. And she fired back that I was being selfish. She said she was doing what was best for her child. And I said I was just trying to live my life. Neither of us backed down. And by the end of it, we were both so angry that we couldn't even look at each other. After that, things only got worse. Rachel started avoiding me altogether, staying in her room most of the time and only coming out when she knew I wouldn't be home. The atmosphere in the apartment was thick with tension, and I hated every minute of it. But I still refused to move out. I kept telling myself that I had every right to be there, that I wasn't doing anything wrong. But as the weeks went on and her due date approached, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe I was being unreasonable. Maybe I should have just left when she first asked. Maybe I should have been more understanding, more accommodating. But the stubborn part of me refused to budge. Now, with Rachel 7 months pregnant and the baby's arrival looming, I find myself at a crossroads. I know she wants me gone. And I know that things are only going to get more difficult once the baby is here. But I also know that moving out isn't as simple as she seems to think it is. I have a life here. I have routines and responsibilities. And while I understand that her life is about to change in a major way, that doesn't mean mine should have to change too. Does it? So here I am, stuck in this moral gray area, wondering if I'm the asshole for refusing to move out. Part of me feels guilty. Like I should have just packed up and left months ago. Like I'm somehow in the wrong for wanting to stay in the place I've called home for the past 2 years. But another part of me feels justified. Like I'm standing up for myself in the face of unreasonable expectations. I guess the truth is, I don't know if I'm the bad guy in this situation. Maybe I am. Maybe I'm being selfish by staying. Or maybe I'm just holding my ground. All I know is that things aren't as black and white as they seem. And sometimes, doing the right thing isn't as clear-cut as people make it out to be. I wish I had an easy answer. But life rarely works that way. For now, I'm stuck in limbo, unsure of what to do next, wondering if I'll ever truly know whether or not I made the right choice.